I'm Lisa Evers. Welcome to this special episode of Street Soldiers. One of the founding fathers of hip-hop is facing serious accusations. A growing number of men is claiming that they were sexually molested by Afrika Bambaataa when they were boys. Now it's time for us to hear from Bambaataa himself. Afrika Bambaataa became a national star with his 1980s hit song Planet Rock, considered one of the all-time greatest in hip-hop. He also brought peace to violent city streets. He founded the hip-hop cultural organization Zulu Nation and has been a visiting professor at Cornell and invited to speak around the world. But now he's accused of a crime that's tough to forgive, molesting boys. A little bit later, we'll hear from Bambaataa's chief accuser, Ronald Savage. But first, the hip-hop legend himself sat down with me for this exclusive interview. No questions were off limits. Now, you are revered by millions of people around the world for your work, for your legacy, for your continuing work in the community. A lot of us in the hip-hop community and beyond were shocked when we heard these recent allegations of sexual molestation by men who said this happened like some 30-something years ago. What was your reaction when you first learned of this?
I was saying, like, wow, this is crazy. Why now? You know, you know, what happened, if you say this happened, what happened in the 70s? What happened of you saying this in the 80s or even the 90s? So to see all this come out, was like a real hurt. And to see that, people say this would happen to them and this was victim. Let's deal with all the real victims and all the different abuse and all the violence that goes on in our community.
Now, one of the alleged accusers, Ron Savage, says that you sexually molested him when he was a teenager. His story has gone from he was 17 or he was 15. He was a crate boy for you. Is there any truth to that?
People keep saying things that they've been around me. One time I hear they say something like they've been around me in the era of 1977 and all that. You couldn't even come around me at that time. Most people don't look at what these people are saying. Is there any contradiction? And these people, I know, Drew, people like Smitty, Jazzy J, all these other greats who was part of my group. So you was in the presence of them. You was never in the presence of myself. And many of people never want to go speak to none of my other members who was of that era and of that time. They just going along with he say, she say, what they call gossip.
Now, so far they say there are these 4 alleged accusers who all say this happened all within a certain period of time, many, many decades ago. Have you ever abused any underage boy?
I never abused nobody. It just sounds crazy to people to say that here you abused me. My thing is, all my people back then. The hundreds of people that been around me. If something like that happened, why you never want to? None of them. And many of these other leaders that's out there that was all over the city of New York.
In terms of this mess, you deny across the board that any of these kind of things ever happen?
I deny any of this type of craziness happened with these different individuals. Some people, they send me stuff I don't know. Some people send shakedown like, what you going to give me and stuff. So I said, man, I don't know what these people talking about. Well, I'm going to give you what? What is you trying to get from me? Is you trying to get money, or you trying to get some type of power stuff? Or you seeing shakedowns happening in your group? You seeing all this type of hate going on within our organization? You seeing people causing problems and just talking all type of craziness on the internet, and nobody's listening to what I've been saying for so many years that I've been teaching, what I've been speaking on. And they need to go back and listen to some of the words and stuff and the wisdom that I have put out for so many years on the internet, instead of trying to attack me. Help me to do the work to help other peoples, not just in our community here, but in our communities all over the world.
Ronald Savage, now 50, tells a very different story. He claims in 1980, when he was 15 and under the age of consent, playing hooky led to his first sexual encounter with a hip-hop pioneer, and was followed by at least 4 other abuse incidents.
I didn't have nowhere to go, so I had his number. And I called him, and he paid for the cab for me to go to his house. No one can tell anyone when they're ready to let stuff out. And especially if you haven't went through what I went through and other people went through. It's like, how dare you? I used to be on stage and stuff, and when he came to the stage, I used to leave because I didn't like to be around him. And growing up, I didn't even look at none of his pictures or photos and stuff like that. I feel yuck.
The main accuser of this mess has been this Ronald Savage, who's been stirring it up, to put it mildly, in terms of talking with people, reaching out to the media, reaching out to different, trying to get his, whatever he's trying to do to get it out there. Do you have anything you want to say to him?
I would just say the brother knows the people who he came around in my group with, and know that he wasn't in my presence unless among those people, and he needs to go back and speak to those people who was part of our organization and deal with them and stop all this type of craziness that they've been trying to put by attacking me.
And you never touched him inappropriately or anything like that?
I ain't touched this brother whatsoever.
The allegations have set off a social media firestorm and ignited feverish debate. Since the alleged incidents happened so long ago, no criminal charges can be brought, and there have been no settlements or payouts, says Bambaataa attorney Charles Tucker Jr. Have there been any criminal charges filed against Afrika Bambaataa at all?
Absolutely not. Not today, not yesterday, not the day before yesterday, not ever.
What message do you have for people who have loved you and adored you and respected you and followed you, but maybe their faith is a little bit shaken by what they've, this mess?
My thing is, be a thinker. Be one that search and research. Don't just jump on a bandwagon because everybody else is jumping on the bandwagon. Use your mind. Use your thoughts. See with your third eye. Talk, speak, communicate, but do not gossip, because gossip is a sin and slanderer. If you look up slanderer in the Bible, the Quran, the book Coming Forth by Day, or any of the holy divine books out there, you will see what all the divine books talks about slander. And if you say you so-called, you are religious or spiritual, then you will understand what this type of stuff does and what type of hate it produces.
Coming up, our panel weighs in.
A lot of people are confused.
He's the executive director of Male Survivor and advocate for survivors of sexual violence. Chris, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me again, Lisa.
We appreciate it. Also with us is Chuck Creekmer. He is the founder and CEO of allhiphop.com, one of the top hip-hop news sites out there, period, in the world. They have been covering the Afrika Bambaataa case very extensively. Chuck, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Also with us is Peter Brill. He's a former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney. He's been rated repeatedly one of the top 100 lawyers in New York State. He's going to help us understand where's the law in all this and where is justice and what do we even consider justice in this day and age. But Chuck, I want to start with you. Where do you place Bambaataa in terms of the hip-hop constellation of important figures?
Well, he's on Mount Rushmore. You know, he's on Mount Rushmore of hip-hop. He's one of the pioneers, along with folks like Kool Herc, Grandmaster Flash, and he's credited in a special way because he's one of the people that is credited for taking hip-hop from a street force, as in the Black Spades, to a positive force with the Zulu Nation. And along with his musical contributions, I mean, I've made it known that Planet Rock, one of his hit records was, you know, when I fell in love with hip hop.
So these charges and these accusations that are coming out, very, very disturbing to a lot of people.
Very disturbing, very disturbing. A lot of people are confused. Some don't want to even look at it. Some don't want to talk about it. Some don't even want to acknowledge it. And it's a scary scenario for a lot of people as well, because you're looking at someone who you perceive in that powerful figure and, you know, almost in a fatherly capacity when it comes to hip hop.
Right.
Yeah.
He's called one of the founding fathers repeatedly.
Absolutely.
Christopher Anderson, we've seen a lot of these cases, and I don't want to just point out Bill Cosby or Afrika Bambaataa. Dennis Hastert, one of the most influential politicians in the United States at the time. And it's also, there's male victims, there's female victims. But why is it so hard for us to even talk about this type of a subject?
Well, Lisa, I think one of the real challenges for acknowledging and addressing sexual abuse is it's a crime that happens in private. It's not something where we see it being done out in public, and we know that for survivors especially, the shame and the stigma that attaches to survivors as a result of these victimizations oftentimes lasts for years, if not entire lifetimes. And it becomes very, very difficult oftentimes for survivors to come forward and disclose. On the one hand, because we see so much negative responses
commentary
to disclosures,
right.
All of whether it's male survivors or female survivors, we see a lot of negative blowback whenever a survivor does step up and come forward, especially against influential, powerful,
popular people who are Peter Brill. When you look at the legalities of this, what concerns you? Because a lot of people are starting to feel now these cases are being tried in social media, and there's no real legal remedy. You can't go get your day in court.
Well, I wonder how long people are going to have to look over their shoulders. I mean, 20, 30 years. There's statutes of limitations, but your reputation, one way or the other, whether these allegations come out or ruin. Now, there are such things as false allegations. There are plenty of accurate allegations as well, and we don't know what's going on with Afrika Bambaataa, but we know that there are plenty of people out there looking for their moment in the spotlight, making these allegations even if there's nothing to back them up.
Now, you've been in the legal profession for a long time on both sides, as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney. Any gauge of how many authentic, legitimate complaints there are versus false accusations?
I'd say the vast majority, it's impossible to know for sure, but the vast majority are probably accurate. The problem is that the people who make the false allegations, and we know there are people who do that, ruin it for everybody else, because now society is saying, well, maybe all of these are false.
Why is it so hard for us to accept these kind of accusations when it is somebody that's a popular figure?
Well, I think one thing, just to speak to the false allegations, if I can, there is some research out there that suggests that the number of false allegations is extraordinarily small. Anywhere between, some of the research I've seen is 3 to 5%. So without question, Peter is absolutely correct. Are there some individuals who do come forward with false allegations for whatever purposes? Sometimes, but it's important to stress that because of what I was just saying, the immense blowback and the negative repercussions for most survivors who do come forward, especially male survivors, it's important to stress that for somebody to come forward, especially in a public way, as we've seen many of the survivors, especially like Ron Savage, do, it truly is an immense act of courage for them to go public.
Chuck, what about that in terms of how hip-hop reacts?
Well, again, to answer your previous question, it's really hard for people to come to terms with this sort of situation. We come up knowing these people in some form or fashion, whether it be through their music or through their deeds, which Bambaataa's done a lot, incredible amounts of good. And then, you have something that's so opposed to what you know that it becomes difficult to process and understand.
But Peter, what about the fact that this was so long ago? This is what we had trouble as a news organization covering with Ronald Savage, who we did put on the air when we had Afrika Bambaataa, but in terms of, this is about 30 years ago.
Right. Well, New York has a strict statute of limitations. You have to be, I think, no more than 23. They give you a little bit of an extension past the time that it happened for you to come of age and then be able to bring charges. But remember, the age of consent in New York is 17. So if you're 17 or above and you want to intelligently, rationally engage in sexual activity with an adult, that's on you.
But if you're 16, you're considered a child.
Unless it's with someone of a very similar age who's just over 17, right? That's the little catch in the law. But for someone with that big age difference, yeah, it's 17 or above, and if you're 16 or below,
so basically there is a deadline with the statute of limitations. Once you hit 23, after that you can't really file a complaint with the police or district attorney.
Right.
All right. Coming up, we're going to find out, is it different for male survivors of sexual abuse as opposed to women? We'll find out when we come back.
Anything goes on Good Day.
Stephen Siller, stairway climb in the world.
Chuck, what have you been hearing about this?
Well, frankly, we've been hearing a lot. a lot that is not positive for Afrika Bambaataa, and quite frankly, we've been hearing that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and that there's a lot more potential victims, a lot more accusations that might be coming forward, and quite frankly, you know, if you search the internet, I mean, you see people that are literally going on the record, which is a lot different than the past, which we've, you know, quite frankly, been hearing these things for years. You know, we've been hearing these sorts of rumors for a very long time, but there was nothing there to really verify or even corroborate what you've been hearing. So now you have his homeboy from the Bronx who's like, bam, you know me, and he's really going on record and saying just some mind-blowing stuff. And then you have others who, you know, like the bodyguard, who some have said is not really a bodyguard, but, you know, has been affiliated with the Zulu Nation. And then on the other side, you have people from within the Zulu Nation who are now saying different things as well. Some who are saying they heard things, and then some who are still claiming that these are false allegations.
Christopher Anderson, why is it so difficult for men to come forward, and why are you so convinced that a lot of these accusers of Afrika Bambaataa are telling the truth?
Well, in terms of your first question, Lisa, what we know is there's so many myths and stereotypes and stigmas, especially around male sexual victimization, that lead to a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of, in this particular case, because the alleged perpetrator is male, there's a lot of misunderstanding about whether or not this means it was gay or whether these victims are homosexual, and it's very important for people to understand. Child abuse does not establish a person's sexual orientation. An act of pedophilia is a crime. It is not an act of consensual, you know, sex between two peers. So a lot of times people are afraid to come forward because they're afraid that they're going to be stigmatized and identified, you know, somehow as something that they are not. In terms of what is it that I'm hearing in terms of the allegations being laid against Bambaataa by a number of people who've come forward now, they're very, very similar kinds of stories. We hear people reinforcing details about specific kinds of acts and behaviors, but also when you look at the dynamics, you have here, you know, and not to say that just because somebody is influential or powerful within a certain community that makes them a suspect, but, you know, there are parallels to big cases that we've heard, you know, recently. Obviously the Sandusky case being one that I think is very applicable. You have somebody who has established a number of ways to sort of be a benefit to the community, and some of the things that he has offered, you know, sound very much like classic grooming behavior, where you've got.
What do you mean? Explain grooming behavior.
Sure. Oftentimes, perpetrators, you know, sexual violence, especially sexual violence against children, is not typically a crime of violence. It's not the stranger danger.
They don't hit them over the head and drag them into the bushes.
Right. We know that the overwhelming majority of perpetrators of sexual violence, especially against children, are people who are known and who establish strong, trusting relationships and bonds with their victims. And that's part of what's called a grooming process to basically, you know, ensure that they have power and control over their victims.
Can the party unite? After a big meeting, questions still surround Trump.
I want to thank all of you for being with us for this episode of Street Soldiers. Christopher Anderson, Executive Director of Male Survivor, Chuck Creekmore, Founder and CEO, AllHipHop.com, and Criminal Defense Attorney Peter Brill. Thank you guys all for being with us for this important episode, and we'll keep following the Afrika Bambaataa case and see what emerges, see what evidence we're able to get, and what proof and what happens. And as Christopher said, if you are in that situation, you know, please seek help, because to carry that for years has just got to be horrible. And remember, use your mind. It's your best weapon. I hope it's your only weapon. Let's push for peace.